Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the End in Mind podcast. I'm your host, Caitlin, and I'm super excited to welcome Dr. Andrea. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
It's going to be a great conversation. I could already tell in our little pre interview how well you and I will get along, and I know the listeners will love you too. So, can you start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes, well, my name is Dr. Andrea Lein, and I am trained as sort of like traditional psychologist. I have a PhD in clinical and school psychology and lots of other degrees, which I will not name right now. But I've been doing this for a very long time. And as I told you earlier, my daughter is right around your age, so I could be your mother. But I love
Love
that.
it.
And I'm very, very passionate about helping all women, but specifically, I do have this call in my heart to help a next generation of women do things differently than my generation felt like we had to do it. At our age now, a lot of us are realizing, I don't know what we were sold and how we pursued things. And not that I have a ton of regrets. I'm really happy with the way my career has gone and my life has gone, but I do think we have an opportunity at this point to teach and do things differently. So I currently coach gifted, high achieving, highly sensitive women. That's my expertise is in giftedness, which is sort of an unusual niche. Most people don't use that word, but I am a giftedness expert and a positive psychologist. And so that's the work that I do today.
Oh my gosh, I love the giftedness. I've actually have not heard that used, like especially in combination with mental health,
Yes, that is my
specific.
sweet spot. Yep. I'm one of the
I
few,
love
and I don't say this in any kind of boastful bragging way, but my husband often reminds me, he's like, you are one of the leading experts in this intersection, like period. Because there aren't that many of us, you know? And it's true. I've written book chapters and I'm currently working on a book. And like I said, I actually created my own graduate program when I was in my 20s, like combining different programs. Like I got multiple degrees to focus on this because there wasn't anywhere you could go to do this. And I remember talking to some of my professors like in the other program about like I'm also going to do this other degree, and they like people looked at me like I had three heads. Like, what are you doing? And I was like, I want to specialize and understand the psychology of gifted people. And it was like I there weren't, again, this was a long time ago, there was like no one doing that. Most of the people in the field were focused on education, which totally makes sense, but I did not want to do that. I was like, no, I want to understand the social and the emotional and the psychological development, because what happens. So I've worked with kids, I've worked with families, I've worked with adolescents and young adults and older adults, and so giftedness doesn't like leave us. Although there's a lot of stuff now on TikTok where people are like, "Oh, I went to a gifted program and now I'm like screwed up and I'm like a burnt out gifted kid." Like I have a lot to say about that, but no, it doesn't. It's part of like who you are. It's how you're wired. So you can either accept it or be in denial of it. But if you understand it, especially as a woman, you'll be able, I think, to thrive more in life because you'll understand how you're uniquely wired, and it is not the same as like a lot of people. So I love it.
Oh my gosh. It's so interesting to hear you talk about it, like from this, very educationally driven background that you can
Mm,
bring. Because I find so many people that I've interviewed on this show prior did
mm,
not specialize, as you mentioned, like in something like in school about this type
mm,
of topic. And there's
mhm.
nothing to be said that that's wrong with that,
No,
but they
no.
can't bring the science, right, that you're going to
Right.
share with us today that can
Yep.
really explain to us, like, why are we wired like this? What are other people wired like? And how
Hmm.
can we either start to like mesh with more people that are like us, or aren't
Yep.
like us? What's your opinion on that? Like, how do we morph ourselves to fit the world, or do we start to, allow this different world to really become like our new reality as gifted
Yeah.
people?
That's a great question. So I think a lot of women, a lot of grown women may not necessarily know, and they probably don't identify with this word gifted. I almost didn't even use this word like in my branding and my business, and because it's so charged and sort of weighed down with a lot of different opinions and thoughts about it. So for a long time I fought it and I didn't want to use the word. My husband actually was the one who told me years ago, he's like, you just need to own it because this is your expertise. And so maybe you could educate people on what it is and what it's not. And so I finally decided, okay, I'll just go there. But I think it's like anything, it's both and, right? Like I do think that if you weren't quote unquote identified as gifted, and there's pros and cons, and we can talk about like the pros and cons of a label when you're young, but if you were never identified, then you could grow up and you just either internalize this feeling of like, oh, I've always felt a little different, or I've always thought differently, or something, and you don't really know what it is, and you may actually self-diagnose with something else that looks very similar, which is could be fine, except if it's not actually true, then that comes with a lot of stories, right? Like depending on what you identify with. And it could cap you in sort of growing into the fullness, like all the capacity you have as a gifted person, like such high potential. And not to say that not every human has gifts and talents, because I believe every human being absolutely has gifts and talents and unique things that they bring. But when I talk about giftedness, they're from a textbook perspective, from a psychological perspective, it is a very clearly defined, while people can, disagree on the exact definition, but it is a clearly defined construct that sets someone apart from just sort of your normal, I would say average. When I say average, I just mean sort of average intellectual ability, because that there's a normal curve. That's what it is. It's a normal average intellectual ability. So when you're on the higher end of that, and giftedness is not just high IQ, it's like a collection of things. But if we just even think about intelligence, cognitive intelligence, right? You are you are very different than the average person. So you do live in a world where most of the people around you are not quote unquote gifted, but so we need to be able to adapt, and because we're part of the world and we have gifts that can influence the world in a beautiful way. And I think from a psychological and a social and emotional development perspective, if we don't have some some sort of like-minded peers in our early childhood, in adolescence, in our young adult years, and certainly as adults, like we have more choice as adults because we can hopefully find those people, but kids don't. They're at the mercy of like whatever school they go to, whatever their parents, they don't have any choice. So a lot of gifted children may not have any gifted friends per se. And so they can internalize this feeling of like, oh, I'm really different and there is something kind of like wrong with me. It's like it can feel like a negative, which obviously, affects one's self-esteem and self-image. But that doesn't always happen. Even kids who have peers who are like them, there's it's like any kid. Like in some ways, I'm like, yes, you're gifted, but you're still a human being. You're still like a normal human being like everyone else. So I think both are important, like being able to embrace this aspect and understand it so you can leverage it well. Um, and tell a story that is, I think, empowering and not like I'm damaged in some way because you don't understand it, right? It's like understanding your superpower and then being able to use it for good for the world. That's my
Yeah.
take on it
Okay.
anyway.
I really resonate with that. I know our listeners will too, because we
Hmm.
are the children, right, that have come out of like different diagnoses. Like mine
Yes.
was minor dyslexia. Then I
Yep.
was moved into like the small class. Then I
Yes.
couldn't understand why I was getting everything after being in the small class for so long
Hmm.
and no one
Hmm.
else was. And there was like a lot of frustration. And I was the only girl in a lot of those classes because a lot
Yes.
of girls go
Yes.
never being diagnosed with anything, for so
Yes.
long. So because of their attention in the classroom or whatever it may be. And
Yep.
what I realized, and I'd love to know your opinion on this, because
Mm.
as I got older, I realized I didn't have a learning disability. Like I still have minor dyslexia where I'll mix things up, but like in my
Hmm.
mind, everyone could like possibly do that, like
Yes.
it's not super consistent where
Yeah.
it's, wild that I'm doing that.
Yeah.
But I did find that a lot of trauma was like based in why I wasn't able to be present in school. Do you see that
Hmm.
happen with gifted children because we're so highly sensitive? Like I remember feeling the feelings that my parents had when I was like 5 years old, and to feel like
Yeah.
betrayal or guilt or shame at that age is
Yes.
wild for like other people that aren't gifted, I'm sure, to
Yes.
think about. But I really felt it so intensely. And then I started to believe that they were my own emotions. Do you see
Hmm.
that happen? And how do you help your clients, like
Yes.
overcome that type of trauma?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And first of all, I've worked with so many young people in particular in the past where they also either their giftedness was sort of missed because they're either learning some other learning issues or trauma or anxiety or something else was sort of like getting the attention of the adults around them. And so their gifts, their beautiful gifts, were sort of like either masked or literally just not paid attention to. And then their whole identity, because it's the focus was like, we've got to fix this thing, this dyslexia or this ADHD or this anxiety, fill in the blank. And then that young person's identity becomes more, this is what I mean about identity. It becomes more of like, oh, there's something wrong with me. Obviously, there's something broken in me. So everyone around me is helping me try to fix me, right? And that's a different, very core different, like internalized sense of self than a child who's like, I have an amazing mind. I have a cool nervous system that's different. I pick up on things that other people like. If that's framed even by one adult who understands this, that child is going to have a very different trajectory, uh, just the opportunity to grow up with a different set of beliefs than a child who has to overcome, all these other things. I do think it's very common. Your point about being the only girl in the class, also heartbreaking and so, so true and so um, unfortunate. I mean, there's so many things about it that are challenging, but yes, gifted individuals have this heightened sensitivity to things in the world, and what a lot of parents either they just don't know, no fault of their own, right? They're people just, this is not something that most, I mean, I raised a gifted daughter, but like I knew all about it because I was, I was reading all this stuff and I was like soaking it all up. So I would say she's privileged in that way because she had a mother who understood, and I was not ever, well, I'm not a perfect parent by any means, but I mean, I understood her out of the box way of being. And I saw that as the most beautiful thing. And I didn't want anyone to ever try to stuff her in a box of something that she's not, because she's amazing. Right. And everyone
Yeah.
has these gifts. So, yeah, when you're little and you're picking up on the emotional atmosphere of the room in a way, and all kids can do this, but gifted children are, they're not only are they heightened emotionally and sensitive to that, but cognitively they are, you might remember this, like thinking in a way, in a complexity and worrying about things existentially that most children never do. That is a core, like a hallmark of gifted kids. Like they're thinking about issues in the world, like at a young age, like that. If you meet a kid who's like that, they're most likely gifted, because that is, not your typical 5-year old doing that. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, you're not alone at all, if that's any yeah, sort of encouragement or validation of like what you've described is, sadly, I think a lot of people have gone through that, but they may not yet know that part of this puzzle or part of the understanding of their growing up has anything to do with giftedness, because they've never learned about it. It's just not really talked about. Or if it is, it might only be talked about again, like in educational terms, which is just like one little slice. It's important, but it's just
Right.
one little slice of the whole thing.
Yes. Okay. I love this. And like I can expand on that too, which will lead to a next follow-up question as well, because my mom was very protective over this part of
Mm,
me. And
mm,
she had a learning disability. So she was more so like protective from that side. Like, don't make
yes.
her feel like she's wrong or like, this
Yeah.
is just the way she thinks. And I remember
Yeah.
her when I was so little, like defending me to my dad and saying, Einstein had dyslexia. Like she was like,
Yes.
this doesn't mean that Caitlin isn't brilliant still. Like
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
can still happen and like don't put her in that box. And as a child, I still felt guilty, right? Because I couldn't like perform the way that they wanted me to. And
Yes.
then to cope with that emotion would come the existential crises that you're
Hmm.
explaining. Like I
Hmm.
remember I would feel so overwhelmed by emotion that I would tell myself, I'm just a small grain of rice. Like I'm a small bit of sand. Everything's gonna be fine. I'm floating on this rock. Like, and I'm
Yes.
literally like 6 years old,
I'm
like I
laughing because
didn't
I was
even
the
know
same way when I
things.
was little. I'm totally laughing because I'm like, oh my goodness. It is really it's such a it's yeah, I remember thinking and being like that when I was younger too. Hmm.
Yeah, I would love to know like your story around this because I feel like you felt called to this. Like I
Yeah.
remember when I launched this podcast, it became so much more than just about myself. Like I knew I had
Yeah.
to share my journey for some reason, and I do think that that's a
Yeah.
part of giftedness too. And I'd love to know
Yes.
your opinion there. Like there's like this calling to help others because we can feel so deeply like how hurt people are that it
Yeah.
changes the way that you think about life and like actually
Yeah.
other humans. I heard somebody,
Yeah.
I'll share this briefly, share this after like they came out of a near death experience. And
Hmm.
she was like, oh my gosh, after this near death experience, like I realized everybody's connected and like how many people I've like hurt with my words or like, she wasn't a
Hmm.
bad person, but she was like, I just
Hmm.
wasn't open to that. And I was like,
Hmm.
wow, I felt that my whole life, like
Yes.
almost this like burden, as you were
Pain.
mentioning. Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
like not ours, but it's like the collective, right?
Yes.
So I'd love to
Yes.
know your
Yes.
story with that and like if you feel
Yeah.
like that pushed you towards your calling now too.
Yeah. Yes, I will share that. Before I do, though, I want to go back just a second, just to name what you were describing in your experience, and also so people listening can either learn more about this or maybe again because in our field, like we throw around these terms, but other people are like, "What are you talking about?" So just to define your particular combination of being really brilliant and having some kind of learning disability or processing issue, right? And this
Yeah.
is actually really like my sweet spot as a therapist previously working with younger people is uh, the term we use for that is twice exceptional. And people can have like I mean it could be multi exceptional, but like we in the field we call it twice exceptional. So I could say I specialize in working with gifted and twice exceptional individuals, and now mostly focused on women because I do think that women, we have like added layers of challenge that we have to overcome in our culture, right? So I do feel very called to it. Partly, because I'm a woman and what I've walked through, I have a daughter, what she's walked through. Now I have a granddaughter who's 6 months, and I'm like, I want things to be different for her. But also because I have worked with so many brilliant people, boys, girls, men, women, the whole spectrum. But I just my heart for everyone, every human being, is that they can fulfill their purpose and calling and use their gifts in a meaningful way. Like that's like my heart for everyone. But I think when we are gifted, we we do have all of this. It sort of feels like a burden when you're younger too, to hear the words like, oh, you have so much potential. It's like, and it feels like, how will I ever live up to it? And I don't mean it that way, but I do mean if I can help one person, right? And the ripple effect of that, or if I could help 10 people, like when I think about if I can help support people sort of break through whatever the limiting things are, their understanding of themselves, understanding their gifts, understanding their maybe twice exceptionality, and help them live life so they can really flourish in their gifting, they're going to impact the world. That's why I'm so passionate, is because they're going to impact the world in a mighty way. And I want to see it happen. Our world needs us women, us gifted women, us creative women, us highly sensitive women to like step into it fully and like let's go. Like there's no time to waste now. Like let's do this thing. So I do feel called. And I think when I look back on my life, aside from my own figuring things out as a young girl who was highly sensitive, very different than I'm the oldest of four in my family. We have a lot of things in common, my siblings and I and my parents, but I think I always felt a little we I say that and I know like now like we have a lot of things in common, my siblings and I. But growing up, you don't know any different. And so I was definitely the one that was I felt overly sensitive. Like I felt like I got that communicated to me. It's not to say that my brothers and my sister are not, but they probably watched me because I'm the oldest and then like adjusted, right? Like their personalities developed a certain way. And
Yeah.
so anyway, I also I remember very distinctly in high school, I was the kind of person who, on the one hand, I was, taking the AP classes and, I was like in the classes with all the smart kids. But I also was a little like living a double life at some point, and I was hanging out with people who were not necessarily taking advanced classes. Some of them were like at risk of like dropping out of high school. And I have one friend in particular who was brilliant. I mean, like so smart, so creative. And I still think of her today because she came from a really like she had a tough background and I had a tough background. So I think I had just this compassionate heart and I just so wanted her to like not go down the path I saw her going down. And part of that was also because I was sort of going down a path but at some point I course corrected. You know what I mean? Um and I saw like one group of people I knew who were all going off to like the best colleges in America and blah blah blah, but they came from affluent families. They came from homes with two parents. They came from, not to say that they didn't have hardship in their life, but their lives were very different than mine and this one person I'm thinking of. And I think I have a heart for the, and it sounds strange because I think when people hear I specialize in gifted, we immediately assume privilege to that. Like if you're gifted, oh, well, then you have privilege. And in a certain way, I understand why people say that. And I understand why people think gifted programs are elitist or whatever, right? I get the argument, but I have worked with so many people who are people of color, people of different ethnicities, like low socioeconomic status, which was me. And my dad is from the Philippines and was an immigrant. I was the first person to go to college. I was definitely the first person to like go get a master's and a PhD. Like no one in my family did that. I mean, so I just I want to help sort of the kind of like the underdog, and I think especially you might be gifted, highly achieving, and everything's great, but I do think that just because you're smart does not guarantee that everything's going to be great. And it's a shame if that goes to waste and the world doesn't get to, benefit from, and not just what the world doesn't benefit, but just we as individuals I believe I do believe it's our birthright to flourish. Because if we can really flourish emotionally, socially, spiritually, physically, then there's a beneficial ripple effect. It's not selfish. It's like that's how we're going to change the world. So I'm very passionate and women often take on so much and I'm like, okay, how do we help more women flourish? Whether they identify as gifted or not, like how do we just unleash it so that we can start turning what feels like a real dark world. I know it's always felt like that at different times, but I think most people would agree that right now or in recent years, it's like, can it get any darker?
Yeah.
I'm on a
It feels like
mission.
the dark ages, like
Yeah,
back in
yeah.
the
And I'm
medieval
just
times. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the rebellious side of me, that like the healthy rebellious side of me is like, no, not on my watch. Or not on my watch.
Yeah,
So,
I feel that exact same call. I'm so glad that you said that because
yeah.
I'm like, there is so much positive, right? And like, there are so many positive people in this world that aren't having the light shined on them just yet at the magnitude that it should be to help
Mm,
others. And I
hmm.
just am so passionate about what you do because you help
Yeah.
us, right?
Hmm.
Understand the trauma and the association of maybe some emotions to our giftedness. Because I think a lot of us, going back to the childhood moments,
Hmm.
we associate that as like negative. Like I know that that's really
Yes.
what happened to me for so long.
Yep.
And that was exactly why I had to course correct early
Hmm.
in my 20s to be able to
Hmm.
say, like, am I really the person that I want to be? And I remember the
Hmm.
first time my fiance and we went to therapy like separately when we
Hmm.
first moved to this house. And he brought this up to me. He was like, when I was a kid, like before shit got crazy, because we both come from like traumatic childhoods. And he was
Hmm.
like, before shit got crazy, like I was the class clown. Like he was like, I love to make everybody laugh. And then he goes,
Yes.
somewhere along the lines, like it just got so like dull and like now life was so serious and like he had to take on a lot of
Mm,
responsibility at a young age that normal children wouldn't have to, much like your experience, I'm
right.
sure, of being the oldest. He was the second
Yeah.
oldest in his family. And he was like,
Hmm.
and that just really sucks. Like for
Yeah.
younger me, like I want to get back to that. He was like, I want to get back to that silliness. And then
Yeah.
it kind of reminded me too, like from being an only child, that it was
Mm,
very easy for me to be serious because I was around adults the majority of my life. Like I had a few
mm,
friends that were close to me, but most of my time, even in
hmm.
my early 20s, I spent time with my mom's friends and like my
Yeah.
family that was all adults and there were no other kids
Yes.
there. So then I realized like I have to get back into this playful peer to peer type of relationship where it's not
Yeah.
so serious all of the time.
Yeah.
And I find in society, highly sensitives, like we're quick to lean into that, right? Because we
Yeah.
empathize with it. And it's
Yes.
easier to feel into the emotion than like to feel
Yeah.
into play. So for any of our
Yeah.
listeners, I hope that that encourages them to,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
get
I'm
back
so
into.
glad. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad you guys have been sort of on this journey, both of you together. And it's so you articulate it so well because I do think that when I remember having a moment at some point in my adulthood where I was remembering my younger self, like the age of myself before things felt like they got really like I lost myself, like she just got buried underneath everything else that was going on. And it was so sad because I was like, oh, she was so, oh, it makes me emotional just thinking about it. Like she was so happy and joyful and like a little ball of light. And now like I'm so thankful. My husband teases me because I'm very silly. I'm like so it's like I just come full circle because I was like very serious, very depressed at certain points earlier in my life, very cynical, very jaded, very angry, very all the dark. And now when people meet me, they're like, it's hard for them to imagine because they're like, you don't seem that way. I was like, well, that's because I that's because I come full circle. But now whenever I see a little girl that's like 3 or 4 years old, which is like some like the age that I think of myself where I'm just like so happy. Um, I feel this like deep connection to every like 4 year old girl out there. I'm like, girl, I know. And I feel that same playfulness when I see little girls that age, like just being who they are. My husband will look at me. He's like, that is you. He's like, that is you. I was like, I know that I'm like living my 4 year old self out now in my however many decades. I'm almost 50. Like, uh, now. And I'm like, I don't care. I love it. I'm gonna embrace. I hope I lean into it more and more. I hope when I'm 65, I'm even more
Yeah.
playful.
Totally. Like no cares in the world. I actually feel like that's the dream. Like before we got on to today's call, I was checking in with some of my like groups that I'm in and I was telling them my business is very prosperous. With
Mm,
that can come challenges with time, energy, like
Yeah.
it can sometimes suck up so much of my
Yes.
fun, to be honest with you, because I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm client facing, right? Like I have to be
Yeah.
lively. Then I get off and I'm like, oh, like I have nothing left. And I
Yeah.
really get frustrated because I love being present with people. Like that's
Hmm.
what therapy gave me. And it's so hard. And I say, like, I should say personal development because there's a lot of coaching
Hmm.
in there, like similar to
Hmm.
what you do. I think therapy gets you so
Hmm.
far, right? I've shared that on
Yeah.
the show before. Like, you
Yeah.
kind of need the other second half to like pull you
Yes.
back to the light,
Yes.
when you get through
Yes.
therapy.
Right.
But I was sharing this like this lack of feeling present. And I think so many
Hmm.
business owners go through this as well because we strive to be successful, and right, success, a lot of us correlate with money and being able to
Yes.
not worry about money, but it's like at what cost, right? Like
Yes.
at what cost am I ignoring myself, ignoring my family, my needs, like that little girl, honestly. I feel like
Yeah.
that's the dream, to be able to do
Yes.
both. And is that what you would
Yes.
say you help your clients, embody, like what you're living today?
Yes. And yes, and it's taken me, like I said, I'm several decades older than you, and not that my hope is that we can sort of intervene earlier. I don't mean intervene like a necessarily a therapeutic intervention. I just mean that we can break the cycle earlier and earlier and earlier, right? Because like if we don't know something, it's we just don't know. Like my mom didn't know things. It's not her fault. And when I was raising my daughter, I wish now I knew things that I know now. You only know what you know. But I think that I have had the benefit and like the heartbreak of reaching everything I wrote out for myself, and I was very goal oriented. Like in my even my teenage years, I knew I wanted to get my PhD, and I thought I was going to get it by the time I was 23. And like I had these outrageous, and then I got pregnant at 19 unexpectedly because I was sort of like on a different path for a moment, and like life was like, oh. Well, now what are we going to do? But I was still very goal oriented. So I had all of these things that I wanted. And I remember approaching 38 years old. I was like getting close to that birthday. And I remember going back in my journal, I remember looking at all of these things, these like dreams that I had, things that I thought truly earlier in my life were like impossible. Like I didn't know
Wow.
how. I mean, if you think about it, I was 19 years old, unmarried, baby, but I figuring out like what am I going to do? And then no one in my parents did not have college degrees, and I thought I was going to get a PhD. Like there's no that I say to people like I could have just said like I'm going to be an astronaut and go to the moon. Like it other people have lives and families and things where maybe it doesn't actually seem that crazy. But for me, it almost was like, am I delusional? Like, who
Yeah.
does that? Like, who does that also as a single mom? Like, I did not meet any other single moms getting their PhD when I was like not many people.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that again to I'm sure there are other people out there, but it's almost delusional. Like it's all I remember thinking some people might think I'm crazy. Like some people
Yeah.
might think I'm crazy, but I knew in my heart I'm like I am called, like I know I'm supposed to do this, and so that was what was driving me. But what happened was I had my dream job. I was making more money than I ever thought. I was married to, the man of my dreams. I had raised my daughter. She was already going off to college. All before like by the time I turned 38.
Wow.
And I
Yeah.
remember one wondering like, okay, so now what? Like what do you do
Right.
when everything you dreamed of, even things that you didn't weren't sure were going to come true, they all come true.
Wow.
It's a leveling up moment, but I didn't know like I hadn't I had never even thought I would ever like be able to like all those things happen. And then they did. And then I went through this whole process, which has probably been the last decade of my life, of stripping away everything that was, and again, I don't have any regrets about the path I took because we do the best we can in the moment with what we have. But a lot of it was a striving from a place that was not rooted in like deep, deep knowing and self-worth. If I'm being 100% honest with you, right? It was I was being driven by a lot of other things. Now that drivenness, and I think a lot of your listeners can identify with this, it can get you far. It can make you a lot of money. It can give you the accolades. It can get you all that achievements. And there's not anything necessarily wrong with that, except that you do pay a price. And I think that's what people are starting to realize. And I think women in particular, they are starting to realize, okay, what is the price? What's the real price tag of this? Because it's not all about money at all. We
No.
think it is. And then you make all the money and maybe even more. And then you realize, oh, wait, am I happy? Like, what is this feeling of happiness that I'm searching for? Where does it come from? I thought it was going to come from all this. I'm not sure now, right? And so a lot of people, I think, get to that point. And for me, I unraveled everything, and I actually stepped away from work for several years. A lot of that was uh, instigated by some serious, like chronic illness, which I think my body was like, you've got to stop. Like you have to
Yeah.
actually stop. Because I wasn't stopping. I just kept going, 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 going. Even when like I didn't need to. I didn't need to, but I just didn't know any other way. And so I kept going. And now I feel, now that I have like my little 4-year-old self like right by my side, I have promised her, I'm like, honey, I'm never, it was again such an emotional moment where I was like, I'm never, I promise you, I'm not going to betray you again like that. I'm never going to live my life with the priorities that I had before where you get forgotten, because that is how I lived my life. She was forgotten. She was
Yeah.
just
Wow.
totally like poor little thing. And so
Yeah.
now I just made that commitment to myself that like, but I had the privilege of age, also being in a different life stage, right? I was surviving as a single mother. I was
Yeah.
hustling. I had to,
Yeah.
right? So there are stages of life where that's why I'm very clear. I might have a encouraging message for someone, but you know the stage one knows. Like I don't mean to say if you're a single mom and you're trying to make sure like you've got food on the table that, you could like there's a reality, but there's also living in the reality and holding on to hope that even if it takes 5 years, even if it takes it, like you're not going to give up on yourself. You're going to get to the other side. And that's what I had to do like for a real long time before I could get to this point and say, okay, I don't need to hustle. I really don't. And I stepped away from work that, my husband and I decided we knew it was a huge financial hit. It was a big financial hit. But somehow, and
Yeah.
this is the miraculous part of things like this, when we just trust, okay, I feel like this is what I'm supposed to do next. I'm stepping away. And I'm not stepping away and then like quickly jumping into the next thing like I wanted to. But um like somehow it felt like we had more abundance. Like it was so fascinating to me. But I
Wow.
still have I don't know how that works, but I just feel like it's one of those spiritual principles that you hear about, but it's like, oh no, it's true. We like cut our income like basically almost in half. And I just said, I need time. And it actually took longer time than I even thought. But somehow we expanded. Like in a material way. Not that that was our goal or anything, but like somehow that happened. And I realized, wait a minute, I'm happier, I'm rested, I'm more present. I'm like the things I always wanted to be. And I thought I had to work really hard for all of that. And so God, however you want to think about it, like gave me this opportunity to unhook those two things, to know that my abundance, my everything that I thought like I did not have to strive for it and that I could be really rooted in a place of rest and give to the world from a place of rest. So everything that I do now, everything that I give out, I'm like, I'm not stressed. It's not coming from a
Yeah.
place of I've got to do this. It's coming from a place of like, oh, I get to do this. What a gift.
Yeah.
So it's a very different, it's very different than if you met me like 15 years ago. But I didn't know any better. You
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
And life just gives us these opportunities, right? Life just will give you the opportunities to keep taking steps closer and closer to like the fullness of like the place where you want to be. That's part of the personal development. That's evolution, right? we're on a
Yeah.
journey as long as we can like really surrender to the lessons that are right in front of us, which sometimes are hard because usually they come through like challenging life situations. But and I've had plenty of those. That's why I think I'm like I've learned a lot because I've had lots of opportunity to learn a lot.
Right, in like a short amount of time. And that's what I think a lot of
Mhm.
highly sensitives, like, I don't know if we choose this path before we come down here, like
Mm,
what the deal is, but it does feel like we have chosen, right, to experience a lot, like in a condensed form of time. And like,
mhm.
I'm only 29, as you know,
Yeah.
and like, I've lost a parent, my
Mm,
parents had a horrible divorce prior to that. My
mm,
parents that got back together, like it was wild, it was chaotic, it was like
mm,
hippie times, made no sense to me as a child. And I'm an
mm.
only child, so I felt like I had no one, to like
Yes.
confide in or talk to.
Yeah.
My mom and I are very close, but
Yeah.
she was dealing with a lot in her own poor soul, right? Like the
Right.
poor thing. So
Right.
it was so chaotic. But I always knew as a child, and I'm sure a lot of highly sensitives would resonate with this. Like, I knew I could take it, and like almost like this was a part of my growth, as you mentioned,
Mm,
to
mm,
get me to the other side. But even coming out of this situation with my mom now, like, because she was so ill,
mm.
there's like a lag, right, of time where you're like, what's happening? Like, did that really just happen? Now I have to process and
Yes.
still be a functioning human,
Yeah.
like some of the
Yeah.
times, not all the
Right.
time, right?
Right. Yeah.
I'm so appreciative of you sharing. Like, there's the years, right, where you're kind of relearning those
Oh my
lessons,
gosh.
like
Yes.
over and over again, because the presentness is what I feel like is my most greatest gift that I give people. And I
Mm,
feel so frustrated when I feel like I can't give that, like even
hmm.
for myself, like being present with myself, to be honest.
Yes.
So that's
Yes.
been the hardest part for me in this stage of my journey. I feel like most of the
Yeah.
listeners would resonate with that too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's like giving ourselves grace
Right.
because when you're in it, life throws certain curveballs and we're like, oh wow, I did not see that one coming, you know?
That's for sure.
And you're like you're in it and it is a practice and I remind myself all the time like a lifelong practice like what you're describing already is so mature like even at a younger age of like recognizing like oh this is gonna like a lot of people much older than you do not have that awareness or lens through which to see the hard things so I want to point out like I don't know if it's unusual, but I do think it's like it's very mature. It's a
Thank
certain
you.
like psychological maturity and it speaks to, everything that you've done up to that point. But every moment it's like it is sort of like I had something earlier this year for myself where it was like, oh my gosh, I got blindsided. I was like, oh, I haven't had to deal with something like this in a long time. And I knew on the one hand that I was like, okay, I'm gonna come out the other side of this I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I'm going to be a different person. Like this is an opportunity where like I shed more, I level up more, like I wasn't expecting it, but here we go, right? And so I've done it enough times where it's like, okay, it's still hard in the moment. It's still like you cry all the tears or you do whatever, you're processing in the moment, but there is some time like when the actual situation itself sort of like subsided, I carved out time in my schedule to like integrate, like to give myself time to process. Like I knew, and I'm a very social person. Usually my calendar is like lots of, dinners out and coffee dates and everything. And I remember I had actually traveled back from Hawaii earlier this year, and I did not tell anyone I had come back home. I didn't tell
Yes.
anyone
Yes.
until like I gave myself a couple weeks. Not because I didn't want to see people, but I knew like my heart and soul knew like, girl, like you got to just get quiet. And like my husband
Yeah.
was there, but he'd be working and like whenever I had pockets, I was like dropping down. That's how I say it to myself. Like I was dropping down into my body and
Mm.
just like letting letting myself just process and begin to integrate. Like, and that's the
Yeah.
part where we're becoming. We're becoming. So sometimes we can't be as present. Sometimes present is like presence is, I think people toss around like mindfulness and presence, and then we assume that like a mindfulness that feels like so like calm and peaceful and like, oh,
Right.
I'm like, I'm so present.
Yeah.
But like being present to the moment, it can sometimes be like screaming in your pillow, literally
Right.
screaming in your
Yeah.
car, bawling your eyes out. Like that is being present. Maybe not like screaming
Yeah.
at someone, but like getting it
Yeah.
out. Like for me, I have to do things like that. I cannot, it is not healthy for me to, I mean, I don't think it's healthy for anyone to bottle up the emotions, but I'm very emotional. So, like, I've got to express it. I've got to get it out of my body. And that's part of the integration process. So, yeah, you have grace for like maybe right now I've got to like, I got to wake up and go to work and like do the things. I got to function. Like, or if you have kids, it's
Right.
like, I've got to take care of the kids. I can't stop doing
Yeah.
life. But maybe it's like a season where, okay, I've got to carve out pockets of time when I can, as much as I can, to like, let's get present with myself first. Because once you give that time for yourself to be present for yourself, I find it's much easier then, like the presence that you hold within comes out with other people more. It's just, it's like an overflow of that place.
I really appreciate that detail of like what we need to do right after the fact, like when we
Mm,
have the time to process the emotion and like the
yeah.
situation, like you said, has subsided. Because we, as highly sensitives, like at least in my experience, I also have PTSD, which I've openly shared on
Hmm.
this podcast, like from my
Hmm.
childhood. It's like I
Yeah.
feel like I'm still in it, right? And then you like
Yes.
wake up and you're like, is this still happening? Like
Yeah.
what literally what just happened. So the
Yeah.
integration I think is even
Mhm.
more important for us than any other type of person, because so
Yeah.
many people around us, right, like they just want us to move on. And it's kind of like goes back to that, like, oh, you're so sensitive, right, like you
Hmm.
shouldn't be worried about that, and they mean it from a good place. They don't want us to be upset,
Yeah.
but the emotion is still there. So like if you ignore
Yes.
it, it gets really bad.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I will also share like I definitely had I put it in the past tense, but I definitely had like complex PTSD from my childhood. It was just like it wasn't like one event. It was like a childhood of, and I love the research, and I always remind myself like not to minimize that because it's obviously like it's stuff to work through, but it's also this is the positive psychologist in me. More people actually experience post-traumatic growth, that like because a lot of people experience trauma, but we don't usually talk about that.
Yeah.
The majority of people who experience trauma, and it's all about how we approach it, right, will grow from it if we're being intentional, if we're doing the things that we're talking about, if we're giving space to integrate, if we're even like new hard traumatic things in that come up in our life now, and some of it usually touches back to the old trauma, right, and it brings it back up. That is an opportunity to integrate things that as a child you didn't have tools for, you didn't have language for, you didn't have capacity for, you didn't have loving people. Not that you didn't have loving people, but you're different. You've created um your group now as an adult, so you get
Yeah.
an opportunity to use current life stressors or trauma to like, okay, let's pull some of that because it's like touching on that stuff, but it's also like the stuff right now, and we can just like, how are we going to integrate? And that leads us to the post-traumatic growth. That's what it is. That's, I mean, I'm simplifying it, but that's it's really powerful. So we don't have to feel, oh, I have had trauma in my past, or even like trauma like a month ago, and now I have PTSD, and like end of story. It's like, no, that's just a description of like what has transpired up to this point. But everything you do with it moving forward is going to determine whether you stay in the PTSD camp or you move over into the post traumatic growth camp. Like both are
Yeah.
options. So,
Whoa. is
Yeah.
so cool. That was just like mind blowing for me because so many people will be like, gosh, you've like been through so much and like, you're still so positive. And I'm like, well, that's just kind of like the way I was raised, right? But this is the real term of it. Like,
Yeah.
that's where we have to get, where we acknowledge and then, like you said, integrate. And it does sometimes feel like a battleground, right? Like we're going
Yes.
through war. And then I'm like,
Yeah.
in this situation that I experienced, I was able to be more present for my family members that needed
Mm-hmm.
it, like step up to the plate that the way that I wanted to, right? But I was so young
Mm-hmm.
before, like I had no clue what was even going on, and
Yeah.
able to process the emotion rather than like having it sit with me, right? For like, I mean, my trauma lasted for almost 10 years, so
Yeah.
that was a long time for me to
Yes.
carry that burden, but it's
Yeah.
very much so the growth piece that we
Mm-hmm.
can all utilize stepping forward
Mm-hmm.
instead of like, I feel like that's the thing that a lot of therapists miss, like they always want to go back and they want to talk about everything, but they don't want to share like what's coming next. Like I remember my poor therapist, I talk about her all the time on the show. I was like, what is coming next? And she kept saying to me, like, this is next level. Like she was like, you have like outgrown like this part of our therapy. And she was
Yes.
like, we've processed it. Like now it's time, like you've graduated almost. So
Yeah.
for anybody
Yeah.
listening, if that's where you're at, connect with
Yeah.
Dr. Andrea because she
Yeah. Yeah.
promise to help you,
Yeah, and I'm so glad you touched on that. It's I had to do a lot of work in my stepping back. So I was doing again like fairly traditional, although I would say it was a little alternative in a way of it's like what you would think of normal therapy, but we were approaching it like I was integrating positive psychology and coaching with the therapy all along. But I was in a residential treatment center program, like so it wasn't your typical like once a week outpatient therapy. Like we could do a lot more. I could do much more because I could structure so much more of the environment than you can do like in 1 hour a week, right? So it's like powerful, but I could see what was possible. And when I stepped away from that in end of 2019, and I took some years off to figure out, okay, like, what am I going to do next? Because I, I knew, even though I am trained in like all the typical like diagnose, treat the symptom, all those things, which again, there's a place for that. It's not that it's bad, it's not anything, but I had outgrown, like I knew
yeah,
years before, I'm like, I do not fit in the box of this kind of quote unquote treatment. Like I'm just even I will take the person who has like the worst trauma, like multiple layers of trauma, and I'm gonna work with them to be like, we are the goal is not to just minimize your symptoms or get you to base level of if it's like -10 to 0 to +10. Like I am going for like +100. Like we are transforming your whole life and your whole identity in a way that like is hard for people to believe is possible. But I'm like, I know it's possible because I've seen it happen. I've seen cases where everyone else, every other therapist, every psychiatrist, every other program was like, we can't help this person. We don't know. We've tried every medication. We've tried it all. And I'm like, okay, let's try something different. Let's try something
yeah,
different. Let's strip away all the diagnoses. Let's take away all the medications. Maybe they don't need them. Let's like it was crazy. That's what I mean about alternative. But I now, I mean, there's a place for therapy. And if someone comes to me and I think you actually probably should focus on therapy right now, I will definitely refer. Like, do that. But some people come to work with me and because we're focused on, I think the future actually has is much more powerful and it's a much more effective tool and motivator for many people, especially if you're the kind of person who you've tried therapy and you're like, I feel like I'm just like going in circles or I feel like I'm not really making movement. Again, for some situations and some people, it works wonders. Great, do it. Absolutely 100%. I'm a proponent of it. But like if you're thinking I want to transform my life. Like I want to be a different not like a totally different person, but I want to be the best like dreamy version of myself, in this lifetime. That's what I love doing because it is remarkable how much people can change their lives. And again, professionally, I've worked with people and seen them totally change their lives, but I just know from my own story, people who knew me, younger version of me, and people who know me now, I'm like, I hardly believe it. It's like, I didn't even know that was possible. I'm not trying to
That's
not be depressed. I'm not trying to not be anxious. I'm not like, I've done all I live a life where those things, they don't touch me like I used to be consumed by. They're just, they're not there. Right. But I don't take that fixed pathologizing, like diagnostic way, which again, sometimes gets people stuck in thinking like, oh, I have PTSD. I'm not saying you were saying that, but some people might get a diagnosis, which is meant to be
that's what I
helpful.
thought.
Yeah, it's meant to
Yeah,
be helpful, but
exactly.
what the potential downside with diagnosis is we get a diagnosis from an authority figure, right? It's a doctor. We think like they know
Yeah.
stuff. They know stuff,
Yes.
so they must be right. And whether they say it explicitly or not, we believe, well, I guess this means I have this thing until someone tells me I don't, which I guess, especially in our culture, because we can throw medications at it and they, who there's a shift now starting. Like I'm starting to see more mental health professionals talk about it, but 10, 15 years ago when we were helping people get off all of the medications that were clearly not helping, um,
Yeah.
I didn't know anyone who was doing that. I
No.
mean, some people looked at me like, I mean, I wasn't the one doing it, psychiatrists were, but like on our team, I mean, it was unheard of. But I just want to
Yeah.
say, like, well, look at our nation. We
Yeah.
spend the most money in the world on psychiatric medications. We, by
Yeah.
far, like it's in the billions, like we as a country. And so you would think if we do that, shouldn't we all be like amazing? Like everyone should be really
Right.
happy and everyone should be like functioning well because they're all on their ADHD meds. Again, nothing wrong with it. It's just it's not, something doesn't add up. Something's not
Yeah.
adding up. That's all I
Yes.
have to say. I'm not
Yeah.
saying what's right or wrong or what, but I'm looking at the picture of at least the United States and the way our mental health system is set up, and not just a system, how we approach and think about mental health, I think
Yes.
is misguided. I'll just put it that way. I think it is missing some important pieces, and the lay public, the normal person who doesn't know any better, is getting information from their doctors and internalizing it and thinking this is it. They don't hear the
Yes.
other part of the story.
I'm
I think
so
it's
yeah, sorry.
no, no, go ahead. You can tell I get passionate about it because I'm like, this is someone's life. And
Yes.
especially because I worked with younger people, they're getting diagnosed and given these messages at young ages. And then they
Yeah.
grow up thinking that's their story.
That's their
That's it.
story and that's the identity. Like I'm so glad that you brought that up because I went to communication school at JMU, which I told you about.
Mhm.
And that was the biggest aha moment for me when we started to talk about identity. What you
Yes.
just described, like for our listeners, right? If you don't look at the data, it's the same thing in marketing. Look
Mhm.
at the numbers and then make your own
Yes.
jurisdiction over what is best for you. Like you, especially as the highly sensitive, right,
Yes.
gifted person, like you know what's good for you. Don't
Hmm.
give your power away. Because when
Yeah.
I got this diagnosis, it put me in such a bad place for a really
Mm.
long time. I literally thought I was broken. I thought there was no coming back from it. I even said to my fiance, I was like, I don't think you should marry me because I'm fucked up, like
See?
I
This
was
is
like, there's
exactly what I'm
something
talking
wrong.
about. This is what I'm
Yes.
talking
And I
about.
think gifted people in particular take it so seriously, because
Hmm.
we're already serious people that
Hmm.
it's a layer on top of layer and it's causing even more trauma and it's not helping the root cause, right, of the
Yeah.
situation. It's just more labels. I mean, I was very fortunate that nobody was throwing medication at me. I know a lot of
Mhm.
people were. And,
Mhm.
in other scenarios, sometimes
Yeah.
it's needed,
Yep.
sometimes maybe not, right? And it's
Yep.
just important for everybody, I believe, really to like have the data, be able to make their own
Yes.
decisions. And it's just like going to the doctor. Like, if you don't resonate with one doctor, there's plenty of other doctors out there.
Yeah.
Dr. Andrea can help you. She will, I'm sure, get you in the right hands of the right people if she
Mhm.
can't support you. So, this has been such an amazing
Yeah.
conversation. I'm so sorry that we went so far over. I'm sure you have
That's
a
okay.
busy day.
Yeah, no, that's okay. And I just want to end on this because I don't want someone to hear what I'm saying and think, oh, a diagnosis or a label is a bad thing. I think that there are, my colleagues out there giving out diagnoses, and I don't mean to be judgmental of that either. All I'm saying is that it can be very helpful to understand like a snapshot of right now, and also understand that you could go into, if you had gone to see five different people, diagnosing psychiatric issues is not like a blood test. And all the
Right.
research shows that the validity and the reliability of like across people assessing for things, they'll come up with different diagnoses. So like which one's right? So you just happen to see that person they gave you. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that it's not the same as like a blood test for diabetes or something, right? It's just not the same. So you have to, so it can be helpful. A diagnosis can be helpful as long as you understand and can put it into context. Or if the person giving it to you can educate you in a holistic way to say, like, it doesn't have to be like the life sentence of, it's not the end all be all. But I do think a lot of therapists, unfortunately, some of them might actually believe that and convey that. It's just not true. So I'll leave it at that because I don't want to be so negative and say, some people might say, no, I got a diagnosis and it was really helpful. Like, great. Then that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
If it's
Yeah.
not internalized as like, I am broken, I'm damaged, don't marry me. Like, this is what it can like affect. It does affect people's decisions and lives. So I'm glad that you didn't let it do that.
Thank God my fiance was like, there's nothing wrong with you. He's like, maybe we need to get a second opinion. Like he was so sweet and really stood by me. But I'm
Yeah.
sharing this story because, as you mentioned, I know so many people won't talk about it at this level of being vulnerable, right? That
Yeah.
like it
Yeah.
literally could have killed my entire life, honestly.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
want people that listen to this show know that they can come and they can
Yeah.
ask me questions. They can ask you questions. Like, if you're feeling these emotions, there is support out there that can help you.
Yeah.
If you're not, don't worry, go to the next episode. There's plenty of more content
Yes.
here for you to
Yeah.
support you in another way. But thank you so much, Dr. Andrea.
Yeah.
Can you tell our listeners how to get in touch with you, where we can find you, and how we can stay connected?
Yeah, absolutely. They can reach out to me and find me on Instagram at Dr. Andrea Lein. My last name is Lein. It's German. And then I also have a podcast called The Power to Flourish, which is relatively new and it is geared towards gifted, highly sensitive, creative women in particular. Although, men can listen to it. The topics aren't necessarily just for women, but I do speak directly to gifted women because as you know, I my heart is big for them and winning in life. So those are the best places. And you can also find me on my website, andrealein.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And for all of our listeners, we'll have all the links in the show notes below. Message me. I can personally connect you as well.
Yes.
And thank you so much again. This was such a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.